I'm Scott Ott, candidate for Lehigh County Executive, and I want to talk to you about some things regarding the budget in Lehigh County, the state of Pennsylvania, and the federal government. And I got to tell you up front that a lot of people who are involved in the political process don't think that you're smart enough to understand these things. They tell me that I have to keep it simple, that I have to boil it down to a bumper sticker, that somehow the voters, who are the heart and soul of this constitutional republic, are not intelligent enough to be able to understand what's really going on with their money. I don't think that's true. I think you are smart enough, and I think there's a shell game going on here with your money that you need to know about if you don't already know about it now. But the risk in me telling you this is that you will become so frustrated that you'll become disengaged from the process, and we need to do just the opposite. We need to get some folks passionately engaged in this process. We need people who are not career politicians, who are not beholden to the big unions and the special interests, who are willing to step in and risk everything in order to make a difference for our republic. My wife and I once went to a theater to see the movie The Wizard of Oz. It was one of these beautiful old theaters, and they were showing it on the big screen, and we were very excited about it. Well, as the movie was about to begin, I started noticing an aroma in the theater that smelled like smoke. So I went out to the lobby and tried to find the manager, who I couldn't find, and asked the person at the candy counter if they knew where the manager was. Well, it took me quite a while to find the manager. I finally found him, told him I smelled smoke, and then we went together and went down into the basement of the theater. In the basement, we discovered that the furnace, which was up pretty close to the wall, had actually set the wall on fire, and so the building was now on fire and smoke was coming up into the theater. So I told the manager of the theater to call the fire department. Meanwhile, I went up into the theater and announced to the people in the theater that they needed to stand up, walk to the aisles, and walk out of the theater because down in the basement there was a fire. Almost nobody moved. A couple of people got up and left. So then I went row by row and talked to the folks and said, folks, the theater is on fire. I need you to stand up now, walk to the aisle, and then walk out of the theater. It was very difficult to persuade them to leave. I got to one couple who were probably in their 70s, and I said, folks, the theater is on fire. You need to leave right now. And the guy looked at me very seriously and said, we don't want to miss the movie. Sometimes I feel like I'm warning people that the theater is on fire, and they just don't get it. When you look at what's happening with the Lehigh County budget, the spending that's been going on for the last 4 years that outstrips revenues at an ever-increasing rate, the county executive has had to dip into the reserve fund and other funds to pull out $6 million, then $8 million, then $12.5 million, and next year he plans to pull another $20 million out of reserves in order to balance a budget which is progressively, increasingly more out of balance. The revenue line looks like this, the expenses line looks like this. You can see more of this on my website at votescottott.org. But folks, we need to wake up to the fact that government at all levels in our country is so dysfunctional that somehow a county executive in Lehigh County thinks he can stand up and say, look, I'm only increasing spending a little bit in this year, during which our president is telling us we're in the greatest economic crisis since the Great Depression. Someone needs to wake up. Somebody needs to take a serious look at this and say, how can we let this go on? Now, one of the things that our county executive says is that because 3/4 of the county budget actually is what's called pass-through money, it comes from state and federal sources, that essentially he's not responsible for that. As a matter of fact, Don Cunningham, the Lehigh County executive, has brought in an additional $35 million in the last several years of pass-through money, which he brings home like all politicians and says, look, I've got you some free money. We don't have to raise local taxes to do this. Well, now the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania still doesn't have a budget agreement and has a $3.5 billion deficit. Where is Governor Ed Rendell going to find the $305 million to write a check to Lehigh County this year, which is what the state commitment to the county budget is? And how can we look at a county executive who brings in an extra $35 million in free money and say, you've done a good thing for us? Ultimately, we all pay the taxes, whether they're county taxes, school district taxes, sales tax, state tax, federal tax. It all lands on your kitchen table. You're responsible for it. It's about time we started looking these politicians in the eye and saying, you know what, there's no such thing as free money, and we know that. You need to balance the budget. The county executive is telling us that this is a great fiscally responsible budget that he's prepared for 2010, just like all of his previous ones, despite the fact that expenditures keep going up while revenues are somewhat stable. It's just not true. When your expenses outstrip your revenues, that's called the budget being out of balance. In fact, in 2005, Don Cunningham agreed with this and campaigned against Jane Irvin, saying that you can't dip money out of reserves and throw it into your budget and call it balanced. That's not sound fiscal management. Now he's doing the very same thing, and he's calling it conservatism, fiscal responsibility. It's just not true. The reality is spending has outstripped revenues in every single year of the Cunningham tenure. And it's time to say to Don Cunningham and a lot of these career politicians, you need to get back in the private sector where people balance budgets. You need to get back in the private sector where you have to show results for the money you spend. What's the county getting for its $405 million this year? Well, there are three major things that the county does. Number one is human services, and about $190 million of this year's budget is human services money. Most of that comes from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, pass-through money as they call it. Number two is crime and punishment, and that covers the courts, the jail, the public defender, the district attorney, the sheriff's office, the coroner, and that's about 70% of the locally raised, the county-raised portion of the budget. And then the third element, the third major element in the county budget is 47 bridges that the county is responsible for maintaining. Now the problem is, the county executive wants to have it both ways. He wants to go to Harrisburg and bring home an extra $35 million in pass-through money, and then he wants to turn around and say essentially he wasn't responsible for that, that the fact that the county is now so dependent upon the state that when Ed Rendell tightens his belt, the county gets pinched and the poor and the needy among us feel it the worst. Of course, some other questions we need to start asking of all our government officials are, what are the results? What are the results that you're getting for all this human services spending? If you go to downtown Allentown where the lion's share of human services money is spent, and frankly the lion's share of crime and punishment money is spent, can you see the impact? Can you see the change? Can you see a difference that it's made? So let's try to put this in a nutshell. With the county budget out of balance every year, and increasingly out of balance every year during the Cunningham administration, we're now in a situation that by the end of 2010, the county executive's own budget calls for the tax relief fund to be completely empty. Where does the money come from then? He has no more savings account to dip into. He will have to raise your taxes. You may remember a couple of years ago when a county executive had to raise your taxes by 69.5%. No one wants to go through that again. We've spent 4 years of an administration that has increased expenditures on a curve like this, while revenues were on a curve like this, and the gap is getting bigger every year. What happens in 2011? Get on the phone and call the County Government Center and ask Don Cunningham's office what happens in 2011. Where are you going to get the money to balance the budget then? How can you keep going on this spending spree, with spending going up even during the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, and have no source of income other than taxes to lean on? Your little game of emptying the piggy bank is over. Mr. Cunningham, it's time to make some tough decisions. I'm Scott Ott, candidate for Lehigh County Executive. Thank you for listening. Please go to my website at votescottott.org. That's VOTESCOTTOTT.org. Votescottott.org. Thank you.